So yeah, that's been my experience with it, and that's how I was originally diagnosed. Immediately after diagnosis, they did first thing they did was a bone marrow biopsy. So biopsy, anyone who's had any cancer scares, they know what a biopsy is, or has had cancer, they know what a biopsy is. Biopsy, basically, they go in, they take a piece of, um, tissue, and they test it. So for your bone marrow, they go in through your back. They could go in through your thigh as well. They basically want to go wherever bone is the strongest. Uh, it's it can be painful. it's not um, it's not fun, but it, it's not the worst thing either, to be honest, right? Like, so they went into my back. They got this literally, it's like a corkscrew type motion, and they basically uncork a piece of bone marrow. Um, so they did that, and that kind of tells them, because the blood itself tells you what's going on, but the bone marrow gives you a real sense of how this is impacting the person holistically. So um, they do that, or they did that. Um, they did a bunch more blood tests, because they're still trying to figure out how intense this is, what level it's on, and what I should say about hypereosinophilic or chronic eosinophilic leukemia, it is a very rare illness, right? And as such, last I heard, and it was told, there were only between 2,000 and 5,000 people in the world who had this. Um, I don't know if those numbers have changed. When I was initially diagnosed, and this was 15, almost 20 years now, something like that. When I was first diagnosed, like, my story was put in journals, and my my hospital was constantly trying to put me in medical journals and having discussions about it. They got my permission to do all those things, but I honestly never saw any of the research in paper form, or like any of what was done. My doctor ended up leaving. So my doc Bellevue is it's a teaching hospital, so the doctors actually leave every 2 years. So I haven't seen my initial doctor, and at this point, I've had, if not 10, then close to 10 doctors, who've been managing my care. Um, so yeah, it's certainly, um, you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, so I don't know if more people have been diagnosed, if the rates have increased. You know, even the name change. The name change didn't happen to from hypereosinophilic syndrome. That's what I was calling it for the first 10 years at least. Somewhere in the last 3 to 5 years, it's changed to chronic eosinophilic leukemia, right? And what chronic eosinophilic leukemia does is, when you say it now, it sounds a lot worse than it is, right? So if for example, I tried to get life insurance. I've spoken to all the major companies in the last few years. No one is willing to give me life insurance because I have a leukemia, right? Like, there, you can't sugarcoat it, right? Like, it is still a leukemia. There is still a level of concern that comes with saying you have any sort of leukemia, right? It doesn't matter if it's not, necessarily life or death leukemia. It's not stage 4. It, life insurance doesn't care, right? So I have not been able to get life insurance, um, and last I was told was I have to wait 5 years. Now, mind you, my numbers have been stable, for the last 10 years easily. Like, there hasn't really been a huge elevation, any spikes, and any real causes for concern, thankfully. But nonetheless, I still can't get life insurance. Um, One of the questions that was asked a lot when we had the initial video on YouTube was what treatments have you been provided with? Um, so initially, I was given Gleevec. Um, Imatinib is the um, generic. Imatinib, Amatina, Tanab. Sorry, Imatinib. And I know I'll also include those in the comments because I know that's something that always gets asked. And because it's such a rare disease, depending on the city you're in, depending on, how big your hematology departments are in some of your hospitals, I know it can be very daunting to get care. And that's a conversation, like I said, I've had people email me over the years just to try to figure out what treatments I was given. So my dose was a 400 milligrams of Gleevec. It was initially Gleevec. I was prescribed Gleevec at the time was about 300 a pill. Um, and of course, well, not of course, but Gleevec, you're supposed to take it every day for the rest of your life, right? So we were able to get discounts thanks to the CVS Caremark, um, so that it was free. But it was always a concern paying that much for something, right? Imatinib, the generic, costs a lot less. But whether it's Gleevec or Imatinib, these are cancer medications, right? Like, so people who are on chemo, people who are dealing with leukemia and I don't want to downgrade it. Like, I don't want to keep trying to say it's not really leukemia. It clearly is, but the concern level is so much less for me than for someone who was dealing with stage 2, 3, 4 leukemia, right? Like, so I also have to be mindful of that. Um, but nonetheless, Gleevec is given to people who are um, actual leukemia patients, actual cancer patients who are dealing with chemo, who are dealing with radiation, who are dealing with all those things. For chronic eosinophilic leukemia, there is no, I haven't heard, so I won't say there is no, I haven't heard a story where any radiation or any sort of um, chemo has been necessary for this, transfusions, anything like that. Um, for me, it was that 400 milligram dose. So I was put on it. Um, by the time I was diagnosed, it was about July. I was put on it pretty immediately. We were able to get CVS to give it to me for free. Even if we say I started in August, within a week, my spleen, the swelling in my spleen went completely down. My that pain in my shoulder just about completely stopped. Um, the night sweat stopped. So within a week, complete like transformation. I started to gain my weight back pretty quickly because it wasn't natural. I was still eating regularly. It was just the fact that I was sweating so much at night that caused the weight loss. Um, so once everything became regulated, you know, not back to normal, but it was pretty close for me, right? Like, I'm still just a regular 21-year-old dealing with everything else, except now I have to take this pill once a day. And the biggest issue or biggest side effect was nausea, right? So if I wasn't taking it with food and a decent amount of food, I was probably going to be nauseous. Um, and even if I was taking it with food, sometimes I was still nauseous. And what it really was, it was probably too high of a dose. So pretty quickly, they took me from the 400 milligrams to 100 milligrams. Um, and that helped. We did a few more bone marrow biopsies. Like I said, there was a lot of journal discussions. Um, you know, I'm sure There were a lot of conferences and presentations on my behalf. I, like I said, I've never seen those things, but I know they exist. um, but yeah, it was a lot of, it was honestly trial and error, and it was very interesting watching doctors uh, have this trial and error. Nonetheless, um, I pretty quickly made a decision that I wasn't going to take this pill every day. Um, just, in the beginning, it was a lot of concern of like, okay, this was intense and this is something that you definitely don't want to deal with again. But I also was just confused as to why, if I'm already back to normal, so, by January of the next year. So even though I said pretty quickly, like from August to maybe January, I was taking this thing every day. But by January of the following year, I think I started to say, okay, maybe I'll just do it once a week. It just doesn't, I don't see the need for every day when I have absolutely no symptoms, right? So realistically, the only sign that I had this thing was if I would take the pill and it made me nauseous. Um, and really, it was just the fact that I'm taking this pill. So I definitely made a decision to go, to weekly, and then maybe within 6 months of that, I decided, you know, I'll just I'll just take it as needed. Um, I will say, and I should say, my doctors have never liked that idea. Like from the beginning, they've said, you should take it every day. You need to take it every day. We want you to take it every day. Please take it every day. So every time I go back to the doctor, that is the conversation. Um, but at the same time, I let them know that I understand my body. I know the signs at this point. Like there's been points where I've gotten back on the meds. There's been points where I've not been on it for 3, 4 years. There's been points where I've seen a slight elevation in the white blood cells. So I'm like, hey, there's been points where I've had my shoulder, you know, kind of start reacting or doing stuff. Those things, honestly, haven't. It's been years since I've had any of that, but I'm still very mindful of it. I Some of the things that have been intriguing in the last few years, really last 3 years, like I said, there was the change in the actual name. But one of the more interesting things is I was taking a pill and I was told to take the pill. And it wasn't until maybe 2 years ago, a doctor told me, hey, if you plan on having kids, you shouldn't be on the pill for at least 6 months before you even try. I don't know how that determination has come about. I don't know what's changed, but that's the thing with, experiments, right? Like this is an experiment. There there isn't a huge population that you're giving this medication to for this thing. So stuff happens and, and things change and it's just modern medicine. It's okay. I haven't been taking it. I don't have any children yet, so I'm sure others have stories, and I'd love to hear those because I do want that community.